Good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to give a lecture here, a paper here in the Open University of Cyprus. That's a new experience for me, give a lecture in an open university. I'm coming from an old-fashioned traditional university, but you have to learn every day new things. I'll speak on the relationship between past and present, between myth and actual situations in the so-called Dionysian genres, that is in dithyramb, in tragedy and in comedy. I'll begin with the mainly dithyrambic genre, with the Dionysian genre, with the dithyramb. The 5th century Athenians could experience over a period of 5 days in the month of Elaphebolion, that's the time now, end of March, beginning of April, on the occasion of the great or city Dionysia, that important and representative festival in honor of the god Dionysus, 3 organized literary genres in the form of a competition, in the form of an agon. These 3 genres were closely connected, not only insofar as all 3 can be understood as intellectual sacrifices to Dionysus on behalf of the community, but also thanks to the presence of choruses made up of citizens. On the first day, following the political, it is related to the polis, preliminaries, the citizens witnessed a tribal competition of the dithyrambic agon. Each phyle, each tribe, entered 2 50-man choruses into the competition, one composed of young men, ephebes, the other of adult males. The dithyramb, the ancient cult song of Dionysus, was the polis song, and not only because of the high number of chorus participants. The communal nature of the dithyrambic agon is also clearly demonstrated by the surviving victory inscriptions, the Didaskaliae. Here, the poets, even the famous composers such as Simonides, Pindar, or Parkylides, do not feature. Instead, we find the name of the winning tribe, the winning phyle, as well was the name of the choregos who financed the production. On the 2nd day, from 486 onwards, the year in which comedy was officially incorporated into the Dionysia, 5 comedies, or perhaps just 3 during the crisis years of the Peloponnesian War, were produced. The final 3 days were given over to tragedy. Each of the 3 tragedians who had been granted a chorus by the eponymous archon eponymous, it is the poets to whom the polis had given the right to produce, put on a tetralogy, 3 tragedies, followed by a satyr play. As part of the festival, and against the background of their political contextualization, the 3 Dionysian genres performed different, complementary functions. One particular effective way of more accurately determining these political functions is to ask in which way, in dithyramb and drama, the past and the present are connected. Insofar as we can tell from the scant fragments, the mythic past was incorporated into the lyric genre of the dithyramb in order to reflect the present occasion in a mythic and thus past, yet also timeless world. The festive community of the 10 tribes, it is the polis of Athens, represented by 10 youth and 10 adult choruses, was given a part in the world of remembering. As mediator between the present and the world of the myth, the world of the past, the poet is the mantis, the prophet, or the herald of the musics, charix musaon, who opens up the gates of memory for the assembled community. We observe this exciting interaction between mythic past and festive present in the fragments of Pindar's dithyrambs. In the dithyramb that he composed for his home city Thebes in about 470 before Christ, we find first a series of introductory poetological references and reflections on the choreographic form of the dithyramb and on euphony, that is the correct pronunciation, namely the pronunciation of the letter sigma, the S. This is followed by a longer section in which the Dionysus festival in Thebes is mirrored by a scene from Olympus of a celebration that the Olympian gods are also holding in honor of Dionysus, and who, Dionysus, like in real-life festival at Thebes, are enjoying choral dances. Then, following a poetological definition of himself, the poet prizes himself as herald of the muses, Charix Misaon. Pindar switches over to the narration of the myth, as indicated by the word pote, once upon a time. He moves from Thebes' founding father Cadmus via Dionysus through the central story Heracles Catabasis, Heracles' way to the underworld. Unfortunately, so little remains of the Dithyramb's narrative that we cannot draw any firm conclusion about its contents. I give in translation the beginning, the conserved beginning of this Dithyramb. It is fragment 70b in the edition of Eric Mähler. In the past, Pindar writes, in the past, the song of dithyrambs came forth stretched like a measuring line, and the sun, the sigma, came falsely from the mouth of man. But no, today, the gates have been thrown open for new dances, knowing what kind of festival of Bromios, that is Dionysus, the Uranidae, the gods of Olympus, hold also besides the scepter of Zeus in their halls. In the presence of the venerable Great Mother, Billy, the violins of tambourines let off. There too the castanets ring, and the blazing torch beneath the yellow pine trees. There too the loud-sounding groans of the naiads and the ecstatic cries are aroused in agitation of tossing necks. There too the all-powerful, fire-breathing thunderbolt is shaken, as it is Ares' spear, and the intrepid Aegis of Athena rings out with the hisses of countless snakes. And lightly comes solitary Artemis, having yoked the rise of lions in Bacchic frenzy, and he, Dionysus, is charmed by the dancing herds even of wild beasts. So the translation. The real occasion, the performance of the hymn, either as a processional song or a circle dance, Kykliostoros, is firstly reflected by a heavenly scene and thus ennobled. The actual celebration, telete, also took place on Mount Olympus. Then, the community, in an act of self-confirmation, is told their own story by a chorus made up of members from the community. Finally, the poet, as herald of the muses, opens up for them the gates of cultural remembering. The accidents of transmission mean that no trace of the mythological narrative in the dithyrambs that Pindar composed for Essence has come down to us today. On the other hand, the few surviving lines from Pindar's third dithyramb, which he composed for Essence, arguably show that the laudes Atheniensium, the prize of the Athenians, occupied an important position. We hear in fragment 76 the beginning of the third dithyramb, where the chorus is singing, or shining and violet crowned and celebrated in song, bulwark of Hellas, famous Essence, divine citadel, or in fragment 77, the reflection of the battle at Artemisium. It's only one line. At Artemisium, where the sons of the Athenians laid the bright foundation of freedom. We find in the second dithyramb, composed for Essence, it's fragment 75, no political contemporary allusion, although the chorus arguably invites the Olympian gods to participate in the offering in, I quote, holy Athens, at the incense-rich navel of the city, the omphalos of the city, where many people are to be found, the famous agora, richly adorned with artworks, beginning of the dithyramb for Athens. The fragments of Pindar's Athenian dithyrambs also suggest that the praise of the city and her accomplishments in the recent past of the Persian Wars are reflected in a mythical world. This can be assumed with a high level of certainty thanks to the structure, the typical structure of the Pindaric dithyrambics. Like in the epitaphs, the Amazonomachia, for example, would have served as a mythical model for the Persian Wars. In particular, in the dithyrambs performed by the youth choruses, Theseus adopted the marked roles of a phallic prototype. It is unlikely that contemporary historical events were narrated in the place of a myth. This possibility shouldn't, however, be completely excluded, seeing as historical events were dramatized in contemporary tragedy, like the Persians, and that dithyramb and tragedy, as part of the same festival, were constantly influencing each other in terms of both content and form. The effect of the dithyrambs was probably comparable to that of the epitaphs, such as Plato has Socrates described at the beginning of the dialogue Menexenos. Athens' brilliance was extolled to the outside world, particularly to the allies who were present in Athens at the time of the great Dionysia in May. In this way, each and every member of the polis was made greater and grander in belonging for the Athenians, which was made stronger by the festive narration of great deeds from past and present. In particular, the tribal identity was developed, was strengthened. This strengthening of tribal identity, of the identity of the Fili, was especially important after the Cleisthenic reforms, the introduction of the democracy, since the 10 new tribes had no long-lasting tradition to look back upon, like the 4 older tribes, the Cleisthenes, had disestablished. And it is thus indicative that in the dithyrambic agon, the poet wasn't announced as the winner, rather than the tribe and the chorigos who has financed their equipping. In tragedy, the past and the present of the performance are brought into direct contact with one another. This happens with the exception of Aeschylus' Persians and the Phrynichus' lost capture of Miletus and his Phoenician women, 2 plays were lost, the elder contemporary of Aeschylus, Phrynichus, thanks to an interaction between the mythical world from which the subject matter of the plays is drawn and the political, social and cultural circumstances of the year of performance. The closeness of this contact is demonstrated by the dramatic form per se, whereas in the choral lyric the relationship is disrupted by the chorus's narration and adopts a quasi-epic-like distance. In the dramatic representation of a myth, the mythical past is experienced in the present of the performance. In this way, the audience members are encouraged to link the dramatic action on stage with their own world, then the festivals with choral and dramatic presentations formed an integral part of Attic civic life in the 5th century. Although it actually had nothing to do with the reality of the audience members sitting in the theatre of Dionysus, what one saw on stage suddenly became a part of their lives. Everyone in the theatre is drawn into the plot of a play by the emotions that they experience under the influence of logos, under the influence of the power of the spoken word. The things that a spectator heard and saw affected him personally, as the sophist Gorgias remarks in his comments on the power of word in his encomium of Helen. In this way, the subject matter of tragedy can act as a model or a foil for the present day. The tragic performances are characterized by a constant tension between 2 worlds, that of the myth and that of the year of performance, with its special civic problems. The relationship between the 2 worlds can be established via individual elements, in particular through ideologies via which a contemporary event, rite, custom, or aspect of polis culture, for example, the origin of a literary genre or the invention of musical innovation, is anchored in the mythical world. In addition, single words that belong more to contemporary discourse of Athenian life and that are anachronistic in the context of the play can connect the mythical past with the present, like a bridge between the world of the myth and the world of everyday life. At the level of the dramatic plot, a view can also be opened up in the choral songs to a mythical time that lies even further in the past. In this way, typical of the technique of choral songs, of choral lyric, the current situation, that means the action on stage, is reflected upon with reference to a myth. A prime example is the farce Stasimon of Sophocles' Antigone. The chorus reacts to Antigone being led away to her death with a sequence of mythological analogies. This means that the chorus relates the current situation, the plot of Antigone, to a second mythical world that predates their own and which can add meaning to the first world, so long as the audience is able to decipher the cryptic relationship between the two levels. We today, theologians, are not very often able to decipher this relationship between the two levels of the mythical past and the present. The interaction between the present and myth can be seen particularly clearly in the Eumenides, the third play in Aeschylus' Oresteia of 458 BC. Orestes, polluted by his matricide, travels from Delphi to Athens upon the order of Apollo. In Athens, he is then acquitted in a legal trial by the Areopagus, which the goddess Athena had established for this very purpose. Aeschylus is reacting with this scene to the decisive political event of the year 462, the disempowerment of the Areopagus by Ephialtes. Ephialtes had left the previously influential aristocratic council with the only prerogative which Athena gives them in Aeschylus' tragedy, the judging of murder trials. In this way, Aeschylus is endorsing the democratic reform and also makes it untouchable and irreversible by linking it back ideologically with the city's goddess Athena. At the same time, however, the Areopagus' specific role as judge of murder trials is also a particular honor for the court and can be directly traced back to Athena's volition. This equivocating tendency in Aeschylean tragedy can be clearly seen in the much discussed lines 690 following. I give it in the translation of Zimmermann. Upon it has the Areopagus, the respect and inborn fear of citizens will prevent any wrong being done alike by day and by night if the citizens do not make innovative additions to the law. If you sully clear water with full infusions of mud, you will never get a drink. I counsel my citizens to maintain and practice reverently a system which is neither anarchic nor despotic, and not to cast fear to Daimon completely out of the city. For modern interpreters, the question is whether Aeschylus in these lines is speaking for or against the democratic reform of Ephialtes. I cannot go into details about the discussion here, but I'm in agreement with Alan Sommerstein, who in his commentary claims that Aeschylus is being deliberately vague and abstruse. I quote Sommerstein, thus enabling both reformers and anti-reformers to feel that he, Aeschylus, is someone on their side. This interpretation corresponds with the sentiments expressed in several other lines, for example 516 following and 696 following, in which a moderate form of government is hinted at. This government is neither anarchon, neither without a leader, nor without leadership, nor it is despotumenon, despotic. Rather dainon, that which inspires fear, will have a regulating effect and will lead to sophrosini, moderate behavior. The fact that these statements are made by the two antagonists, Athena and the Furies, underscores their universality. At the mythical level, the political reality is approved of in the end by everyone, and the interests of both groups are respected. For the aristocrats, the radical democracy had connotation of anarchy and a lack of governance. The Democrats, on the other hand, lived in constant fear of tyranny. Against this political background, Aeschylus develops the ideal of a community living in harmony, homonoia. This is particularly evident in the final section of the play, that is, in the song Blessings for the Humanities, in which they promise to keep civil strife, stasis, the basis of all evils, away from the city of Athens. The song in the lines 976 following, the chorus is singing, I pray that civil strife, stasis, insatiate of evil, might never rage this city, and may the dust not drink up the dark blood of the citizens, and then, out of lust for revenge, eagerly welcome the city's ruin through retaliating murder. Rather may they give happiness in return for happiness, resolved to be united in their friendship and unanimous in their enmity, for this is a cure for many ills among men. Translation of Samson. This short overview of the Aeschylean play of the Humanities should be enough to show that the play's structure is defined by a pervasive tension between etiological myth-making on the one hand and the connection of the mythical dramatic plot with the present on the other hand. The transformation of the Areopagus, Athens' claims to Sigeion 399, of all the Athenian Argive alliance 762, entirely contemporary events are set into a mythical past and are thus made untouchable, universal and quasi-eternal. In addition to this, we find particularly in the remarks about the role of the dainon, that which inspires fear in the community, or the promise not to destroy the polis through civil strife, through stasis, general concepts relating to civic communal life, which were especially important in the year of the play's performance, years which were always under the threat of stasis, of civil strife. This constant interplay encourages the audience to confront the everyday reality with a tragic plot and the ideas developed within the play. And this everyday reality was in 458 by no means secure, rather indeed threatened by civil war, by stasis. Accordingly, the tragedian takes a different approach in his use of the mythical past to that of the choral lyric poets. The lyric poet composes for a rigidly defined occasion, for example, the victory of aristocrat in a pan-Hellenic competition, and he mirrors that occasion, festival, the victor and his achievements in the myth. The tragedian, on the other hand, sets out from the mythical world, then brings the myth closer to the present through the use of, I would say, keywords or bridging words, and in this way he makes the dramatic plot into a model for the present. Unlike the epitaphs, however, the annual funerary orations in which the speaker evokes the mythical and historical past of the city, the interaction between myth and present in tragedy needn't be purely affirmative. Indeed, because of the polyphonic nature of the genre of tragedy, in which different standpoints are expressed by different characters, there is much more potential in drama for a critical outlook. This presents itself in a number of ways. To name just a couple of these, the audience member can be led to compare the claims made in the drama with the real world, to assess and reflect upon an argument's validity, or how and whether or not the arguments put forth by a dramatis personae correspond with their characterization and behavior within the play. If the main function of dithyramb in the context of the Dionysia is affirmation, tragedy, I would say, tragedy might be described as irritation. Let us turn our attention now to 5th century comedy, which in modern studies is often labeled as topical, inasmuch as the poets drew inspiration for their plays from the contemporary situation around the time of their play's performance. Via his or her criticism of the state of affairs in the polis, the comic hero hits upon an idea of how to combat the unwanted situation. Our understanding of Attic comedy is largely based upon the plays of Aristophanes, the only comic poet for whom we possess complete texts. Our knowledge has, however, been extended thanks to papyri finds. There was a particular type of comedy we see today that in the guise of myth brought the present onto the stage. The comic poet, for example, the comic poet Cratinus, in his Dionysius Alexandros, asks the question, who was responsible for the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War? The guilty party is Pericles, and this is presented in the form of a mythical burlesque. The technique of this comedy, which is particularly rich in surprise and intrigue, is equivalent to that of contemporary tragedy. In the mythical play, we can recognize the present and all of its problems without difficulty. The outbreak of the war is traced back to the motivations of the protagonists. In Aristophanes' topical comedies, the desolate present, of which the comic poet creates his idea and develops his comic plan, is contrasted with an idealized past. Generally, this past represents the time of the Persian Wars and the fighters of Marathon, the Marathonomachai, or even the founding of Athenian democracy by Cleisthenes in 509 BC, events that already lay 3 or 4 generations in the past and belong to the common cultural memory of Attica. In this way, they are comparable to, I would say, founding myths. Just as in the mythological genre of tragedy, the present is brought into the past with bridge words from contemporary political discourse, and via this zooming effect, the past is contrasted with the present. In the topical genre of comedy, the past is also strikingly brought into the present, strikingly via the 24 main chorus that often appears. Like in the Acharnians, the wasp or Lysistrata, as a lively relic from the good old days, or via characters like the maid young again Demos at the end of Nights, or via the figure of Aeschylus in the Frogs, who belongs to the generation of marathon fighters. And this marathon, like in the epitaphs, becomes a central point of remembering. It should by now be clear that marathon and the time of the Persian Wars is used as a type of characterization for the choruses in Aristophanic comedy, choruses who stand in opposition to the plan of the protagonist. Let us briefly consider the typical plot of an Aristophanic comedy in order to then determine the function of this choral characterization. Out of the criticism of an undesirable situation, the polis, whether this be political or social, the protagonist develops an idea and a plan as how to remedy that situation. In the first part of the comedy, the comic hero puts his plan into action against widespread resistance. In the second part, after the paralysis, he then enjoys the fruits of his labor and rudely dismisses any annoying contemporaries who desire a share in his success. In each comedy, the chorus plays an important role in the plot of the play. They either support the protagonist's plan enthusiastically, as in knights or peace, or they vehemently fight against it, as in Acharnians, wasps, or the main chorus in Lysistrata. It is striking that in the second case, where the chorus is against the protagonist and has to be won over to his plan, that the choruses there are always associated with the good old days of the Persian Wars, or even the foundation of democracy. There are two ways in which Aristophanes can characterize a chorus. He can have certain characters, describe the chorus in the prologue before it appears on stage. In this way, the audience is invited to judge upon the chorus's entrance whether or not, and to what extent, the previous comments actually correspond with the chorus's character. The poet can then have the chorus introduce itself, but still against the background of the comments from the prologue. The role of the chorus is unproblematic in relation to the plot in those plays in which the protagonist calls upon the chorus for assistance. That is the case in Knights, Peace and Wealth, or in which the chorus is already on the protagonist's side, like in Sophia Suse, Ecclesia Suse, and the women's chorus in Lysistrata, or forms simply a non-participating group of ideal observers, like in Frogs. More interesting are those plays in which the chorus is at first opposed to the plan of the protagonist, and then over the course of the confrontation and argument comes over to the side of the protagonist. This is the case in Acharnians, Wasps, and the chorus of men in Lysistrata. Let's have a look first to the Acharnians. In the prologue of the Acharnians, produced in 425, Aristophanes' oldest surviving comedy, a certain Amphitheus, with his supernatural qualities, explains to Dicaeopolis, protagonist, for whom he has negotiated a private peace treaty with the Spartans, that he is being chased by a group of coal miners from the deme of Acharne. They, these coal miners, are hot on his heels and want to put a stop to peace treaty. And Amphitheus is announcing the chorus with the following words, the translation of Sammerstein: I was hurrying here with treaties, sponde, for you. They smelt them, some old men from Acharne, tough old folk, hard as oak, unyielding marathon fighters, men of vapor. Amphitheus' report contains two important pieces of information regarding the role of the chorus and the development of the plot. Firstly, the Acharnians are clearly hostile towards the protagonist. They want to put a stop to his plan with extreme violence. They intend to stone him. On the other hand, an accumulation of characterizing epithets also puts the man into a positive light. In particular, the Marathonomachai always have a positive connotation in Aristophanes, from the Acharnians of 425 down to the Frogs of 405. They represent a nostalgic point of reference in the good old days when the polis, the city, was ordered and harmony, Omnia, prevailed. Both aspects of the chorus's characterization, the negative and the positive, are elaborated upon in the long choral parts, the parodos, entrance of chorus, 204 following, and the so-called paradoxes in the middle of the play, 626 following. I can only give a few details here. The parodos and the following confrontation scene present the Acharnians from their negative side as unrelenting, unreasonable opponents to peace, although their opposition to Dicaeopolis' plan does not appear in an entirely negative light. Indeed, it is out of love for their homeland and the fact that the Spartans have been destroying their vines that they, the Acharnians, cannot support the idea of a peace with the enemy. They arguably speak for many of the farmers who had been expelled from their hereditary land and were forced to live pent up in the city. In the paradoxes, second large choral part, the chorus's individual positive traits are transformed into an overall characterization that is clearly positive. The old man complained bitterly that the merits of their actions at Marathon vis-à-vis the polis are no longer remembered, rather the deserving men of their generation, such as the physician Thucydides, son of Milesias, are hauled into court. 699. Closure of this choral song, translation of Sammerstein. When we, the Akarnan, the old man, were at Marathon, we were the pursuers, but now wicked men hotly sue and pursue us and run us to earth as well. So have a look to Wasp and Lysistrata. In the Wasp and in Lysistrata, the chorus of the old man, the choruses play a similar role to that of the Akarnians. In both of these comedies, the choruses, like in the Akarnians, are opposed to the protagonists. However, the way in which they are introduced, as well as their presentation of themselves, means that certain positive aspects cannot be ignored. These aspects are then expanded into a clearly positive overall image with the parabasis and the development of the plot. Even before the entrance of the chorus, we hear in Wasp, for example, of a particular character trait that is then developed in the parabas, entrance of the chorus, and the parabasis. The old friends of Philocleon, one of the protagonists, locked up in his house, are announced by his son Delicleon. In the Wasps, too, the names of the two protagonists are programmatic, speaking names, Cleon friend and Cleon hater. They are characterized as lovers of old songs and of old-fashioned manners. Cleon is announcing the chorus, the friends of his father, with the following words. Then, by heaven, they've got up late today. They always call for him just after midnight, for his father, carrying lamps and singing to themselves lovely old Homeric, Sidonian, Phrynicus songs with which they call him out. This lovely old Homeric, Sidonian, Phrynicus songs is in Aristophanes a word of one line. Melisidoni, Phrynic, Erata is one of the typical Aristophanic neologism word, Aristophanic comic words here. The chorus of juror wasps are introduced as lovers of tragedy and of the old music of Phrynicus, an older contemporary of Aeschylus. Like Marathon, that in the Akarnians is the cue for a positive characterization, in the Wasps it is Phrynicus and old tragedy. As is often the case in Aristophanes, political and politological evaluations flow into one. The parabasis, which is the second longest choral piece after the parados, after the entry of the chorus, brings the positive elements together into a completely positive image. The opening lines of the ode refers back to the chorus's musical preferences, 1060 following. The chorus is singing, "Oh, the prowess we showed of old in choruses, and the prowess we showed in battle, and the superb manly prowess we showed just in precisely this respect." That's seen in this scene. They are shown on the phallos. Then further on they are singing, "We are the only genuine aboriginal native Athenians, a most manly breed, and one that aided the city very greatly in battle at a time when the barbarians, the Persians, came, blowing smoke over all the city and putting it to flames. Then and then, straight away, we charged out with spur, with shield, and fought against them. After drinking a draught of sharp, bitter spirit, each man stood beside the next." And in the second ode, in the ant-ode, the chorus sings, "Truly, I was formidable then, so that anyone would have feared me, and I subdued my adversaries when I sailed over there with my dreams, with my ships. For we had no concern in those days to want to make a good speech or a malicious accusation against someone. All we cared for was who we would be the best horsemen. That was why we took many cities from the Persians and are mainly responsible for the fact that tribute is brought to Athens for the young to steal." All in translation of Sammerstein. It is noteworthy that in the strict composition of the parabasis, the so-called epigrammatic Sicily, in which the chorus normally speaks about itself, here both aspects of Athenian heroic acts, the land battles and the sea battles, both hoplites and Thebes, are praised in the same manner. Finally, let us take a brief look at Lysistrata. In this comedy, Aristophanes employs the unusual means of a divided chorus with one half chorus of old men and another of old women. He does this in order to have the plot run on two levels, the level of the chorus and the level of the other characters, the dramatis personae. With the two levels, he is able to connect two plot lines together. The young women, who are led by Lysistrata, intend to force the unwilling man into concluding a peace treaty by going on a sex strike. In this way, they are predominantly concerned with achieving a goal related to the citizens' foreign affairs. By splitting the normally unified chorus, Aristophanes transforms in this comedy the political split, which in the year 411 BC made its appearance in the form of an oligarchic putsch into an impressive scenic image. At the other characters level, the goal of the plot is to establish peace between Sparta and Athens. However, this can only happen after reconciliation and reunification has taken place at the level of the two demi-choruses. Or, to put it politically, after a settlement had been reached for both parties, aristocrats as democrats, within the polis. This reconciliation is already hinted at in the parabas by the characterization of the chorus of men, where we hear that in the time of democracy's foundation, the male chorus has defended against oligarchic tendencies. They had then fought against the Persians at Marathon. I quote some lines of the entry song of the male chorus. By Demeter, they, the women, shan't mock us, not while I live. Not even Cleomenes, the Spartan king, who was the first to seize the place, the Acropolis, went away unscathed. No, for all Spartan spirit in his nostrils, he departed, surrendering his arms to me. And further on, that's how savagely I besieged that man, staying all night before the gates, the Propylaea, in ranks 17 deep. At the end, and shall I not help put a stop to that audacity? Then may my trophy no longer stand at Marathon. The Persian wars form the point of reference in the place symbolism, where Athens and Sparta meet and can be reconciled. In this way, the Spartan ambassador at the end sings a song at the end of the comedy and after the peace treaty, in which Athens and Sparta's great achievements in the Persian wars are praised equally. The song in 1247 following, which is telling that Mnemosyne, memory, is called a pun. She, memory, will remind Athens and Sparta of the good old days, just as the choral lyric poet calls upon the muse or memory when he wants to introduce a mythical example to illustrate the achievements of the victor whom he is praising. The Spartan ambassador is singing, to this young man, O memory, send the daughter, the muse, who knows about us and about the Athenians, that time when at Artemision, it's always Artemision, like in Pindar, they assaulted those ships, fighting like gods, and vanquished the Persians, while we were, led by Leonidas, whetting our teeth, I ween, like wild boars, and much foam ran out around our cheeks, and much also poured down our legs. For the men were as many as the sands over the shore were the Persians. It now remains to be seen how we can explain the fact that the chorus, as protagonist or opponent, is characterized in the same way in all three comedies, Acharnians, Wasps, and Lysistrata. We assume the elements of characterization in the three comedies. First, the chorus is made up of old, indeed very old men. Second, they have rendered outstanding service to the polis, both militarily and culturally. Third, they loved old ways of customs, the Kaphistotismomi, that made Athens great and powerful. Fourth, they have a natural aversion to the decayed and present days, especially the poets and thinkers that represented, like Euripides or Socrates. But how do we explain that paradox that these representatives of good old days, with all of their positive traits, try to thwart the protagonist's plan and only declare themselves to be fully on his side after long confrontation? We might view the solution to this problem, to this paradox, as a type of dramaturgical trick of Aristophanes. When a group that has a large potential for identification is finally convinced by the protagonist and goes over to his side after having originally offered strong resistance, this can bring it about that the audience also takes part in the chorus's change of heart. This is even more important when the comic hero wants to do something that does not correspond with the political trend of the year, in the year of the play's performance. In Aristophatic comedy, Marathon and the Persian Wars not only always have an air of nostalgia about them, as my examples have shown, but also form a part of a political agenda that can be best described with the keyword homonia. This agenda is clearly expressed in the paradoxes of the frogs, in which the chorus of initiates calls for internal harmony for the citizens of Athens. Similarly, it was already made clear in Lysistrata of 411 that peace at the level of foreign politics can only come after internal reconciliation. But this agenda, connected as it is with Marathon, is in 405, the year of the frogs, and 1 year before Athens' collapse, perhaps already in 411, at the time of the oligarchic putsch, all but a utopia. At the end of Frogs, Aeschylus returns to Athens accompanied by the blessings of the underworld god and the chorus in order to help the city with his advice, a city which is faced with the greatest danger since the time of the Persian Wars themselves. But the poet, who is, so to speak, a byword for all of the good things associated with the Persian Wars, especially the paedia that is directed towards civic excellence, which, as we hear in clothes, nurtured the fighters at Marathon, this poet, Aeschylus, can only return home within the illusion of the play. The old paedia, the old Athenian virtues, has disappeared forever. Marathon and the Marathonomachai are thus complex codes, expressions of the utopia of a sovereign demos, one that repels foreign enemies and overcomes internal strife, thanks to a harmony based upon the old paedia that Aeschylus embodies. As one can see from the examples of good politicians like Miltiades, Aristides, Aeneas, Thucydides, Acharnians, or Cimon in Lysistrata, Marathon represents the patrios politia type of a moderate democracy. The key word marathon is enough in the comedies of the desolate present day, from whose criticism the comic plot evolves, to hold up a nostalgic past as a point of comparison. And yet, the notion of an appeal that should be inherent in this contrast of the dead, desolate present with the nostalgic past is again and again blurred by Aristophanes and dissolves away in comic laughter. This is also the reason why critics today struggle again with the political function in Aristophatic comedy. I come to the end. As I remarked at the beginning of my paper, the past in the three Dionysian genres of dithyramb, tragedy, and comedy is approached in a different manner and is also related to the present in a different way. In dithyramb, the connection between the present and the historical or mythical past is established by the poet via his chorus. It is the poet who has the greatest authority, as Mantis, as Calix, etc. The present is either opened up to the mythical past, it is the history of the city, for example, or alternatively, the present occasion, the festival in honor of Dionysus, is mirrored at a mythical level. As far as we can tell from this country remains, the function of references to the past in the dithyrambics is strictly affirmative and serves to reinforce identity. The activation of collective remembering in the performative act has exactly that effect which Socrates mockingly describes at the beginning of Menexenus. Every participant in the performance feels greater, more important, and they also appear to be so in the eyes of foreigners who are present. In tragedy, the relationship between present and past is not presented by an authorial voice, but must be established out of the polyphonic system of the performance by the spectator himself. As aids to this process, the poets integrate etiologies and, which I call bridge words, that within the tragic plot are anachronistic, having been borrowed from the contemporary discourse. These connect the present with the stage action and can turn it into a foil to the present day. Within the plot of any given tragedy, the action can also be opened up to an even remoter past. This occurs especially in the choral songs, quoted in Antigone, but also, for example, in Darius' Epiphany in the Persians. In the eyes of the spectators, this is so to speak a dramatic pluperfect. Finally, comedy is firmly rooted in the present, albeit a distorted, fantastical and exaggerated one. The past does, however, play a crucial role in comedy. For this to become clear, one only needs to look at the opposition of old versus new, which is one of the key themes of old comedy in the 5th century. The bleak present is related back to the good old days, the time of the Persian Wars or the formative years of democracy. The bridge between past and present is not only constructed at spoken level, but is also built into the dramatic action and brought to life in the characters of the play, either in the choruses characterized as Marathon in the figure of Aeschylus, frogs, or in the demos of the time of Persian war minarets. The function of the past in comedy is thus comparative with that of the sister genre tragedy. It forms a critical foil for the present day and gives some irritation to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zimmermann, for this rich and very informative talk. Ο ομιλητής είναι στη διάθεση παρόντων και τηλεπαρόντων για ερωτήσεις. Μπορείτε να ρωτάτε είτε απευθείας στα αγγλικά, είτε στα ελληνικά και θα μεταφράζω. Αν θέλει κάποιος να ρωτήσει στα γερμανικά, εγώ παρετούμε.
Yeah. Thank you very much for a very truly fascinating talk. I was particularly intrigued by this whole idea of the transformation, the fluidity and the transformation of myth across all of these genres. I was wondering whether, I don't know if this question can be answered at all, but I was wondering whether, as part of this generic transformations, there is another layer whereby a play, be it comedy or tragedy, makes reference not to the archetypal myth per se, but interpretations or constructions of myth in other plays or in previous texts, whether there is any textual or any kind of philological evidence for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, it's true. You can see.
Η κυρία Τσιπλάκου έχει ρωτήσει τον ομιλητή μας αν υπάρχουν ενδείξεις στα κείμενα ότι η αναφορά που γίνεται στο μύθο δεν είναι απλή αναφορά στην αρχετυπική μυθολογική αφήγηση, αλλά είναι αναφορά σε άλλες ερμηνείες του μύθου, σε άλλα κείμενα.
So that's a good question. Actually, you are right. We can see certainly there was a large scale, which I would call competitive dialogue in this different genres. Let's say tragedy, we can only see it in some plays. If you have the second play of the Oresteia, Electra Orestes scene, there's a competitive dialogue then. Sophocles, Electra, Euripides, Electra, Euripides, Orestes, and all this is, let's say, an internal dialogue in the genre tragedy, but there's another dialogue between, let's say, the poetess per se, Homer, and the tragedians, and I think nearly every tragedian, especially Aeschylus and Sophocles, are always reflecting the great works of Homer, Ilias and Odyssey. So there's another kind of dialogue, and certainly there was a third kind of dialogue. We cannot see clearly the dialogue with Stesichoros, because we have lost nearly all Stesichoros, but we can see in the fragments, in the titles, that the themes of Stesichoros' lyric is the same as in the tragedies, Orestes, Clytemnestra, Agamemnon, etc., etc. So I think there are different types of competitive dialogue, both in the Dionysian genres themselves, also between tragedy and comedy, tragedy and dithyramb, also between satyr play and tragedy. I speak on satyr play, it's another difficult subject, but in these, which I call Dionysian genres, because they are all take part of the city Dionysia, there's always a kind of dialogue, and then there are the other dialogues to the other, let's say, genres. And certainly, there's a lot of research that is done on this. There are all the certain structures taken over from Homer, from the choral lyric, etc., into tragedy, especially to the early tragedy. There's Aeschylus. There are a lot of epic elements, in particular in the long narrations in Aeschylus, messenger speeches. During the last 20-25 years, there's a lot of work is done in this section. Irene de Jong, for example, wrote a whole book on this and these things. But it's correctly, it's quite right. So you could extend it to other questions regarding the myth. I only took it now this one point. The point of past and present in this three genres.
Ο ομιλητής απάντησε ότι σαφώς και υπάρχει διάλογος μεταξύ των συγγραφέων και των ειδών. Η προφανέστερη μορφή διαλόγου είναι μεταξύ των ιδίων των τραγικών ποιητών. Ανέφερε τη γνωστή τετράδα των έργων που ασχολούνται με τον φόνο της Κλητεμνίστρας από τον Ορέστη. Επίσης υπάρχει προφανής διάλογος με τον Όμηρο. Διάλογος δηλαδή μεταξύ των τραγικών ποιητών και του Ομήρου. Θυμίζω εγώ ότι ο Αισχύλος αποκάλεσε τις τραγωδίες του σεμνά ως απλά ψίχουλα από τα μεγάλα φαγοπότη του Ομήρου. Επίσης, ο ομιλητής λέει ότι ενδέχεται να υπάρχει διάλογος και με τον Στησίχωρο, έναν χαμένο για μας ποιητή σήμερα, διάλογος ο οποίος δυστυχώς δεν μπορεί να ανιχνευτεί. Ότι λοιπόν αυτό το πλέγμα της διακειμενικότητας είναι όντως πάρα πολύ πυκνό. Κάποια άλλη ερώτηση ή από τους τηλεπαρόντες. Κύριε Διαπής.
I'd like to thank you for a rich and fascinating talk. You mentioned zooming and distancing devices in drama, and of course, as you know, the late lamented Rubino Inwood makes a big deal out of it in her book on Athenian drama. Zooming devices encourage us to project the fictional action we see on stage onto the present, the here and now, whereas distancing devices encourage us to take a distance and focus on the remote heroic past. What you said got me thinking about choral identity in both tragedy and comedy. In a small minority of tragedies, the chorus's identity is very close to the actual real-life identity of the members of the chorus. That is, I assume that members of tragic and comic choruses were young men, perhaps in their 20s or 30s, not older than that. And it's in a small minority of plays that these men can actually seen as playing themselves. In Sophocles' Ajax they play soldiers, in Sophocles' Philoctetes they play soldiers, in Eurysus they play soldiers, but that's it. And the majority of plays, these young men forming the chorus play the exact opposite of themselves. They play either old men, reverend members of the city council, or women, and indeed foreign women. It's amazing how many tragedies feature choruses of not simply women, but foreign women. Poenisai, supplices, and so on. And even in the Ion, where the women are Athenian, they are in a foreign setting, in Delphi, so they are to be seen as foreign again. So there seem to be different degrees of alterity, of foreignness in the chorus's identity. Sometimes their fictional identity in the drama performed is very close to their actual real-life identity. Sometimes it's further removed, like when they play old men, and sometimes it's even further removed, like when they play foreign women. I wonder if you'd care to comment on this and perhaps suggest an explanation for this. Could you give me a couple of minutes to translate? Θα ρώτησα τον καθηγητή Zimmermann να σχολιάσει την την διαφορά που υπάρχει στην ταυτότητα των μελών του χορού του δράματος, τη διαφορά εννοώ ως προς την ομοιότητά τους με την πραγματική τους ταυτότητα. Οι χορευτές, τα μέλη του χορού ήταν κατά πάσα πιθανότητα νέοι άνδρες 20, 30, 35 χρονών, όχι παραπάνω. Ωστόσο, σε πολύ λίγες περιπτώσεις αυτοί οι άνδρες υποδίονται ρόλους νέων ανδρών. Στον Νέαντα του Σοφοκλή, στο Φιλοκτήτη του Σοφοκλή, στο Ρήσο συμβαίνει αυτό το πράγμα, αλλά δεν έχουμε πολλές τραγωδίες στις οποίες αυτοί οι νέοι άνδρες υποδίονται νέους άνδρες. Συνήθως υποδίονται είτε γέροντες, γερουσιαστές με τις δύο σημασίες της λέξης, είτε γυναίκες και μάλιστα ξένες γυναίκες. Δηλαδή, εδώ πέρα είναι διπλή η αποστασιοποίηση από την πραγματική τους ταυτότητα. I forgot to ask that comedy, of course, takes a step even further and features animal choruses. Η κωμωδία κάνει ένα βήμα παραπέρα και παρουσιάζει χορούς ζώων, εντόμων, βατράχων, σφικών και δεν συμμαζεύεται. Ρώτησα τον καθηγητή Zimmermann ζήτησα από τον καθηγητή Zimmermann να σχολιάσει αυτού του είδους τη διαβάθμιση στην ταυτότητα του χορού και ή δυνατόν να προτείνει μια πιθανή εξήγηση του φαινομένου.
I think if I were a ritualist, I could give a very simple answer to this question. That this is part of the. Maybe there's some things are right in this answer. That this is part of the dionysiac transgression. That one person could become another person by transforming his character, especially becoming from male female or from female male. That's a typical Dionysian feature to say. But it's only, I think, only one way to answer this question. I think you should also go another way, and I think this way is not, until now, I think there's no solution on the other way, but let's say the dramatic way to resolve this problem. I could give another example, which is very difficult from the point of view of characterization. If you take the 7 against these killers, there we have got a chorus of young maiden, of 20 years old maiden, who were afraid of the danger of the occupation of the city by Polynesius and the Argives. And at the beginning, there's Eteocles is speaking to the girls. They have to praise the gods, and he's dealing with them as they are stupid young girls. But at the end of the play, the girls suddenly became wiser than Eteocles. They are speaking to him as techno, child. The young girls are speaking to him as techno. Though there's a change of character in the development of the plot of the play. And I think we should, the first solution, that the chorus very often in the tragedy has 2 phases. There's the phase, let's say, of characterization. He's a character, a dramatis persona in the play, as Aristotle writes in chapter 18 of the Poetics, that you have to, that the chorus has synagonizestai, he has to take part in the dialogue and in the action, etc. And the other phase, I think, is the typical choral lyric phase of the chorus. So the chorus, I think, has two roles. He has a role as a character, especially when he's represented by the chorus leader, who often speaks in trimeter with the protagonist or with other characters in the play. And on the other hand, we have, let's say, relics of the choral tradition in the tragedy, in relics or an heritage, which the chorus is singing as if it were a typical chorus who is like in Pindaric dithyrambs or in Pindaric hymns, a chorus who then has, like in Pindaric songs, is like a mantis who who can open the gates of memory. And this is the way, at the end of the seven, the chorus suddenly, the young women, who at the beginning were afraid of war, etc., and didn't know anything, at the end they know all the history of Thebes, they know everything. So there's a change of character in the play, and I think this change of character is a relict of the two traditions that we have here. Let's say, as Aristotle writes, the tragedy is developed from Dithyramb. The right or not right, but certainly there's a choral lyric relict in tragedy, and so we can in many tragedies we can see that the chorus suddenly knows more than he could know by his characterization. German colleague Wolfgang Grösler years ago wrote an article. I think he isn't right. He says he's interpreting Antigone, that this is, let's say, escapism of the chorus. He is trying not to say the truth to Creon, that he is on side of Antigone. But I think that's not true. But I think also in Antigone, in the fourth Stasimon, the chorus suddenly goes back to his choral tradition and sings a typical, let's say, hymn, comparing the actual situation, Antigone is brought to death, with mythological examples. And so I think this book one should write on tragedy, tracing all these things of traditional relicts, oral heritage, the dramatization and characterization done by the dramatist, and let's say the ritual roots of tragedy, which certainly play a part, as Bill and other ritualist March saying us, telling us. But I think I couldn't give a solution, but only to give some ideas, some ways of possible solutions.
Η απάντηση, να μεταφράσω τη στα γρήγορα, η απάντηση κινήθηκε σε δύο σκέλη. Το πρώτο μέρος της απάντησης κάνει αναφορά στην τελετουργική καταγωγή του θεάτρου από τη διονυσιακή λατρεία. Μέρος της δυνατότητας των υποκριτών και των χορευτών να μεταλλάσσονται σε προσωπικότητες εντελώς διαφορετικές από την πραγματική τους ταυτότητα σχετίζεται ακριβώς με τον χαρακτήρα της διονυσιακής λατρείας, η οποία είναι μια λατρεία μίμησης, μεταμόρφωσης, εξαγωγής προς την εταιρότητα. Από την άλλη, επισημαίνει ο καθηγητής Zimmermann, ο χορός στην τραγωδία έχει διτό πρόσωπο. Αφενός είναι δράμα της περσόνα, είναι μέρος δηλαδή του δραματικού κόσμου, είναι δραματικό πρόσωπο ο ίδιος, αφετέρου διατηρεί συναίσθηση και μνήμη της καταγωγής του από την χωρική ποίηση. Δεν ξεχνά ποτέ λοιπόν ότι δεν είναι απλός χαρακτήρας, ένας στρατιώτης ή μια γυναίκα βάρβαρη κλπ, αλλά είναι ταυτόχρονα και μέλος ενός χορού. Αυτή η δυτική φύση του χορού του επιτρέπει να παίζει με αυτούς τους μηχανισμούς εστίασης και αποστασιοποίησης στους οποίους αναφέρθηκε ο κύριος Γιαβής. Ο κύριος Τσακμάκης να κάνει μια ερώτηση.
What about the gods? Do they belong to the past or to the present? A deus ex machina usually bridges the distance, the gap between past and present. But we have, in comedy, we have Dionysus in several comedies, surviving his frogs. And there he is one of us. He is like, he appears like an Athenian, but the setting is still
in some way mythological. There is a distance. There is more distance than is usual in Aristotelic comedy. On the contrary, we have Bacchae, where I suspect that the presence of Dionysus might be not a distancing device, but probably an approaching mechanism. That his presence in the play might eliminate the distance between the real world and this ideal past. So what do you think about that?
I think the first thing you said is correct. In the Deus Ex Machina gods, this is, I think, a dramatic function to build up a bridge to the past, particularly because the Deus Ex Machina normally gives a foundation of a cult or some institution at Athens. So he's, let's say, only, that's the same thing as Easterling, or so we know to describe with zooming effects. The past is brought into presence by the god himself, by Apollo or Athena in Humanities. It's all like a Dea ex machina in this scene. Even Darius in Persian has the same role as the Deus ex machina, who is explaining one thing to the audience. The other things are more difficult. Dionysus in Bacchae, Dionysus in frogs. We have that's brackets. I think during the last years of the 5th century, there's like a Dionysian renaissance, let's say, because in the same year Aristophanes was writing the frogs, Euripides was writing the Bacchae in Macedonia. So it's, I don't know why, that we can speculate. There's some return to the origins of the dramatic genre, because also if you read the Parados, the entrance song of Bacchae, is like a different, it's like a different, described by Pindar in the second fragment, a different, like a processional song, a form of different, not the Kiklios Sheros, but the processional song. So that's some of, let's say, like nostalgic at the end of the classical period, and it's not our view of 404 that also the poets themselves saw that the period was finished. Aristophanes in his frogs marks clearly marks that here we have the end of one period of Athenian drama, because he gives, let's say, a view like a literary historian on the development of both tragedy and comedy in the 5th century. But I think your interpretation of Dionysus in Bacchae, I agree. He is present, and so the cult and all these things are clearly seen by every Athenian. So it's like it's not. Dionysus is a bridge. It's like as a persona, as a bridge to connect the Dionysian atmosphere with, or the cult atmosphere with the presence of the performance. More difficult is Dionysus in frogs. Certainly there are also some ritual patterns in this play, worked out by Lana Richard in the excellent book on initiating Dionysus in frogs. But I think there's also, as often in comedy, when we get gods on stage, a comic reason, like Hermes in peace, or Polemos and Kylemos in peace. There is, like say, like a kind of parody of the divine. That I would say it's to provoke laughter among the audience on things on which you cannot laugh in normal life. So. And it's another comic dimension, is naturally that the god of theatre, Dionysus, who should be a specialist in questions of tragedy and comedy, in the jargon between Aeschylus and Euripides, where he is the juror, isn't able to give one reasonable answer to all these things. And if he describes his reaction on the Persians and other places, it's quite ridiculous how he reacted. He didn't get any point of content, only this you and such things he is impressed by. So I think the main reason is the comic reason to introduce the god of theatre in meta theatre. So I think it's only to provoke laughter on the costs of the god of theatre. But naturally, all of the other sides, the cultural side, has some influence, I think, like in Euripides.
Ο κύριος Τσακμάκης ρώτησε για τους θεούς. Οι θεοί, λέει, φαίνεται να αποτελούν ιδεώδη μηχανισμό γεφύρωσης του παρόντος και του παρελθόντος, ιδιαίτερα ο θεός απομηχανής. Αναφέρθηκε επίσης ο κύριος Τσακμάκης συγκεκριμένα στη λειτουργία του Διονύσου. Η απάντηση του κύριου Zimmermann ήταν ότι όντως ο θεός απομηχανής έχει αυτόν ακριβώς τον ρόλο, ειδικά στο σημείο εκείνο της τραγωδίας στο οποίο εμφανίζεται, συνήθως εισάγει ταυτόχρονα, εγκαθιδρύει μάλλον, και την λατρεία, η οποία συνιστά και τον αιτιολογικό μύθο, ο οποίος αποτελεί ακριβώς αυτή την πράξη γεφύρωσης, πράξη προσέγγισης του μυθικού παρελθόντος με το παρόν της τραγωδίας, το παρόν της παράστασης, συγγνώμη. Όσον αφορά τον Διόνυσο, ο κύριος Zimmermann συμφώνησε ότι όντως στις Βάκχες η παρουσία του Διονύσου φαίνεται να συνενώνει την διονυσιακή ατμόσφαιρα στο μυθολογικό παρόν της αφήγησης, στον αφηγηματικό χρόνο, με την διονυσιακή ατμόσφαιρα στο ίδιο το φεστιβάλ. Στους Βατράχους, τώρα είπε ότι μάλλον η λειτουργία είναι κάπως διαφορετική, εκεί η λειτουργία φαίνεται να είναι κομική. Παρουσιάζεται λοιπόν ο θεός του θεάτρου σε ρόλο κριτή και βομολόγου στον αγώνα μεταξύ του Ευρυπίδη και του Σχύλου, λέγοντας ανοησίες, χωρίς να φαίνεται να καταλαβαίνει τίποτε από τις τραγωδίες τις οποίες βλέπει. Το εφέ εκεί είναι καθαρά κομικό. Άλλη ερώτηση. Αν δεν υπάρχει άλλη ερώτηση, να ευχαριστήσουμε θερμά τον καθηγητή Zimmermann για την ομιλία. Thank you very much for coming here.